When Apple announced their move to Intel from IBM and their PowerPC chips back in 2005, Steve Jobs mentioned that
Mac OS X has been leading a secret double life for the past 5 years.
Every version of OS X for the past 5 years had been coded in parallel for PowerPC and Intel chips. Now we're on the brink of another huge transition, this time to Apple's own silicon, and it could be a much bigger deal.
This is Living on iPad with David Eden Sangwell.
I'm David for Living on iPad, and I simplify Apple so that everything just works for you. And if you want the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours every weekday at 12 UTC, like this video, subscribe to the channel and ring my notification bell so that you don't miss a thing and you can join my notification squad. In 2005, Apple announced that Rosetta would act as a translation layer between legacy PowerPC applications and the new Intel chips until versions were optimised. When Steve took to the stage at WWDC in 2005, he said that Apple had great products now, but they didn't know how to make the great products that they wanted to make in future with the PowerPC roadmap. He also said that performance per watt was an important factor because of heat and battery life concerns. Sounds familiar? Few realise that prior to WWDC, Steve Jobs had approached Sony. He was famously a huge fan of the brand, and originally the iMac was almost called the Macman in homage to Sony's Walkman. Steve actually wanted Sony's VAIO laptops to run Mac OS X. He actually presented a VAIO laptop to them running OS X in 2001. And even before that, in 1992, Apple had a secret project codenamed Star Trek, which was working on a classic version of Mac OS 7 being ported across to an Intel chip. That was in February of 1992, and by December of that year they had a working prototype. Although Apple's new CEO, Michael Spindler, devoted most of Apple's development time to transition into the PowerPC chips. In fact, the first time that Apple was looking at using Intel chips was back in 1985, when Steve Jobs had first left the company, only a year after the Macintosh debuted, and this was quickly squashed by management at the time. So how did the transition from PowerPC to Intel go? In June of 2005, WWDC introduced the Developer Transition Kit, sounds familiar, inside a Power Mac G5 case, which would later evolve into the Mac Pro itself. Early versions of Mac OS X Tiger and Xcode were released to developers using the Intel code base, along with a Rosetta translation layer which allowed for PowerPC applications to run on Intel between 50 and 80% of their normal performance. Apple announced a 2-year transition over to Intel Macs. Then on January the 10th of 2006, Apple released their first Intel iMac and a 15-inch MacBook Pro, replacing the iMac G5 and the PowerBook G4. On February the 28th of 2006, Apple introduced an Intel-based Mac Mini with an Intel Core Duo processor. On the 5th of April, Boot Camp arrived, running Windows alongside macOS for the first time. On April the 24th of 2002, a 17-inch MacBook Pro replaced the larger PowerBook. May the 16th, MacBook replaced iBook as Apple's entry-level notebook line, and that completed their transition of portable computers in just 5 months. On July the 5th, a 17-inch iMac arrived to replace the aging eMac G4, which was Apple's education-specialised computer. And on the 7th of August 2006, Apple's transition was completed with the Mac Pro replacing the Power Mac and the Xserve based on Intel, completing that transition in 210 days. So much for 2 years. And that's what Apple's told us they're going to do this time. So, how about Apple Silicon and ARM? Apple's first work with the ARM architecture from Acorn Computers was in their Newton line in 1990. That was their personal assistants, which I've got a later one around here somewhere. My eMate 500. This is a beauty. As a result, the ARM project was spun off into its own legal entity, ARM Holdings, of which Apple took a 43% stake in the company, with ARM changing its name from Acorn RISC Machines to Advanced RISC Machines. Throughout iPod's life, they used ARM architecture on board for their low power consumption, and when the iPhone was being introduced in 2007, it was a really easy fit. Apple used a Samsung-produced 32-bit RISC ARM 620 MHz chip, underclocked to 412 MHz, and a PowerVR MBX Lite 3D GPU with 128 megabytes of EDRAM. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that changed the world. In 2009, Apple bought PA Semiconductors for their IP and engineering talent. Steve Jobs later announced that they would be developing their own system-on-a-chips for iPod and iPhones, and in 2010, Apple announced the A4 chip at the heart of the brand new iPad and iPhone 4. Since then, all of Apple's system-on-a-chip iDevices have run with Apple Silicon, using the ARM RISC instruction set, but adding more and more modules and specialized components tailored for exactly what the devices need. That is why Apple Silicon in iPhones, iPads, and the rest are very difficult to compare one-to-one with something like a Qualcomm Snapdragon, because they have dedicated image signal processors, video renderers, they have neural engines now, they have machine learning, they have high-powered and low-powered cores for energy efficiency and high performance. So for at least 10 years, Apple has had their own in-house design chips in their devices, which means for at least a number of years before that, they would have been working on these chips and most likely seeing what they can run on them. Now, WWDC in 2020, because of COVID-19, gave us one of the first glimpses inside Apple's development labs, or possibly a studio that they'd made to look like a development lab, but it looked pretty legit to me. And you can be sure that they've been working on what Apple Silicon could do in a notebook or a desktop for a long time. While Intel's struggled to make their chips perform better without increasing power consumption and heat, Apple's own system on a chips have become more and more powerful year over year, whilst also improving that magical
performance per watt. For 1 watt of power, how much performance do you get?
That incentive to stay with Intel has gone. So let's talk about some of the technologies that Apple is using to make the transition as smooth as possible from Intel over to Apple Silicon, starting with Catalyst. This is from Apple's developer website. Native Mac apps built with Mac Catalyst can share code with your iPad apps and add more features just for Mac. In macOS Big Sur, you can create even more powerful versions of your app to take advantage of every pixel on the screen by running them at the native Mac resolution. Apps built with Mac Catalyst can now be fully controlled using just the keyboard, access to more iOS frameworks, and take advantage of the all-new look of macOS Big Sur. There's never been a better time to turn your iPad app into a powerful Mac app. Now, turning an iPad app into a native Mac app is as simple as checking a box in Xcode. Then it can be tweaked and optimized further from there. But all you have to do is click that box and Xcode will compile a binary specifically for the Mac, which you can then optimize to take more advantage of the Mac's display and interface. Even without Catalyst though, iOS apps will be able to run unmodified on Apple Silicon with Big Sur. The iOS App Store currently has around 2.2 million apps available, compared to the Mac App Store, which has around 28,500. That is a huge difference, and from day one on Apple Silicon, it's going to just open the floodgates. There are going to be so many more apps to choose from. Will all of them be great? No. Are all of them great in the App Store right now? No. But I would guess the average is probably better than they are in the Google Play Store, and at least you can sift through and find those apps that are really, really good. Rosetta 2 is the second way that Apple is helping to transition from Intel to Apple Silicon Macs. Following up from what Apple introduced back on the PowerPC to Intel transition, Rosetta 2 takes this to the next level. With Rosetta 2, Apple has combined just-in-time translation, which means at the time that you're running it, with translation on install, which means that when you actually install an Intel-based app on an Apple Silicon Mac with Rosetta 2, it will translate the app at that point, so you never have to translate it again. It will run as a native Rosetta app. It won't necessarily be as optimized, but it will be pretty good. In terms of performance, Apple did demonstrate Legend of the Tomb Raider running via Rosetta 2 on the Apple Developer Transition Kit at 1080p with pretty high looking settings. They didn't go into all of that detail, but it looked pretty good on the stream to me, and it was running really smooth. Really, really nice to watch. The Developer Transition Kit, by the way, includes a Mac Mini chassis with iPad Pro's A12Z Bionic processor, 16GB of RAM, and a 512GB SSD inside, although this doesn't reflect what the Apple Silicon is going to look like for consumers. It's going to be far more powerful than this. The A12Z chip is essentially the A12X from a couple of years ago, with an extra graphics core enabled. Think what it's going to be like with modern A-series chips. Next up, Universal 2. Universal 2 is a technology which allows a single app package to contain the binaries for both Intel and Apple Silicon Macs. It keeps all of the assets single and then just adds the executable files that it needs to run on the two different systems. And all you do is you download a single app from the App Store, and the app will detect what system you're on and install exactly the right binary for that. So it just takes all of the thought out of it for the users and you just install it as you normally would. You don't need to pay attention to whether it is optimized for Mac with Apple Silicon or an Intel version. Doesn't matter. But why switch to Apple Silicon? So, one thing that we do know is with Apple Silicon, because it's based on the existing A-series architecture with the 5nm process, is that performance is going to be no slouch in these Macs. Whether everything gets an immediate redesign or not, I know everyone wants the new style iMac, the new style MacBooks, the new style everything. It doesn't matter. The internals on these are going to be revolutionary. Of course, I would love to see some new iMac designs. Those bezels are huge. So the current developer transition kit is, by all accounts, underpowered compared to anything that Apple is likely to sell to consumers, is already rivaling the Intel i7 processor in MacBook Pros, and without the thermal throttling that has been such a problem for them, and consuming far less energy. And when you translate that into a MacBook chassis that uses a battery rather than the mains, you're going to see extreme battery life compared to what we have at the moment. We're also probably going to see a huge increase in performance and also probably a decrease in cost. Now, a lot of people have said that Apple would probably rather to keep the extra cash as bonus profit, but I think the trade-off of keeping their margins at about the same percentage as they are right now would actually be a much better idea for Apple, purely because they will be more likely to sell more units in the first place, and Apple is transitioning to being a more services focused company. Apple is becoming a company with more of a focus on services as years go by, because Apple products are lasting longer and longer. If you actually believe that planned obsolescence is a thing that they're doing with these products, you're just not paying attention. That is not the game plan that Apple has. But it makes all the sense in the world for Apple to bring more and more people into their ecosystem to use their services like Apple Music, Apple TV+, iCloud, Apple News, Apple Arcade, and now Apple Fitness Plus and Apple One. Now, in terms of the battery life improvements, the rumours are currently saying between 15 and 20 hours of battery life between charges, which is just insane on a laptop. It's absolutely awesome, and it means you can literally work all day without worry of carrying your charger with you. Plus, think Instant On, just like your iPad. When you tap the power button, it just comes on. The sleep-wake cycle is instant. In terms of performance, even on the Apple Developer Transition Kit, we've seen AAA games running perfectly well on Apple Silicon, even though they're written for Intel. We've seen Final Cut Pro running natively with 3 simultaneous streams of 4K and filters applied without missing a beat. We've had information that Adobe's Creative Suite is going to be available in full from day one, and Microsoft Office will also be fully working natively on Apple Silicon from the first day that it rolls out. Word coming from developers as well is that translating their apps to work on Apple Silicon natively rather than using Rosetta in between is pretty simple and not a big deal for most of them. So how rough will the transition be to a platform that Apple's been working on far more than Intel for the past decade? I think it's probably going to be pretty smooth. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, I would love a like and a subscribe if you want more content like this from me, and join our notification squad so that you see our videos as they come out every day. Thanks so much for watching.